What's up, everybody? Thralls here once again. I'm Necrotic.
I'm Jammin John.
And we have yet another album review for you, and one that, at least was on my radar. I've been a fan of this band for a while, kind of off and on. Still wanted to go over this new one. We are going to go over the latest offering from Fleshgod Apocalypse, Opera. This also comes out on the 23rd of August on Nuclear Blast Records. This band formed in 2007 in Italy. This is their 6th full-length overall. I got into them with their album Agony. I remembered seeing a music video and thinking, man, these guys kind of look like, I don't know, they're dressing up for like Interview with a Vampire cosplay, or it's like a Victorian version of The Walking Dead. Really not sure, but I kind of liked their just insane style of just really brutal death metal, like fast, like, very Italian style. Like think of bands like Hideous Divinity and Hour of Penance, but mix that in with symphonic elements. And I thought that was just kind of a cool approach. I really hadn't heard that specifically done in death metal, and I don't know, I ended up buying a lot of their albums. I enjoyed Labyrinth, I enjoyed King. The last one, it was all right. And then we get to this one, which I definitely sense the winds of change blowing through this band.
Yeah, I got into these guys around Agony and Labyrinth. Notably, I was never really a big fan, but I did think it was just kind of interesting. I thought the theatrics were more interesting than the music, so to speak, because while they were particularly brutal in the beginning, it was more of a treat to watch the videos, and yeah, just like, the hell's up with these guys? This is new.
And the live footage, too. They seem like they put on like a really solid live show. We watched their drummer puke his guts out while blasting and playing along. Like they had some poor dude that was probably his drum tech holding a bucket next to him.
Yeah.
He looked rough. Like probably a bad bout of food poisoning or the flu. It was like a continuous flow of vomit. It's pretty impressive.
It was intense, yeah, and he didn't skip a beat, and that's even more impressive, to vomit with that intensity and not fuck up your parts. Yeah, it's pretty good. I'll give the guy props based on that alone.
Well, that drummer is no longer with the band. I know that this band has gone through some like fairly recent lineup shifts. They do have a new drummer on here, and this one definitely features their female vocalist who does a lot of the operatic vocals, probably a little bit more prominently than before. And yeah, like this, I definitely got the impression that this is definitely a turn in a different direction. I would say, over the past couple of albums, they've definitely introduced more melodic elements. It's kind of hard not to with symphonic elements. Like if you get that neoclassical play in there, you're going to run into melody. That's just what's going to happen. But the music at its core, in terms of its like death metal self, I think is starting to shift more towards melodic death metal. There's still its brutal tracks on here, but I feel like the melody has become a bigger part of this band's sound overall, and namely, I would say like hooks, like vocal hooks, choruses, and that is definitely showcased on here. The opening track, not the opening track because there's an intro, O to Art de Sepulchri, something like that. I don't speak Italian or any other language other than English, and I don't even do that very well. It's kind of a mood-setting opener. Honestly, it does a good job in terms of like establishing the atmosphere. It's very melancholic and dark. You get this very woeful aria. I think their vocalist, Veronica, I think that's her name. I probably should have wrote it down. I didn't. But she has a very impressive range, and she does the aria quite well. She sounds like a wailing ghost amongst the swells of synths as the song builds up, and then you get into I Can Never Die. Don't bet on that, but that song kicks in the door with blast beats. It's heavy, it's kind of vicious right out of the gate. The symphonic parts are complementing these heavy, chuggy riffs, and honestly, it sets up pretty well. And then you kind of get to this very bright chorus.
It's very Disney-ish. I picture Cinderella singing to the mice, or Ariel and the Little Mermaid singing to Ursula. I don't know, that's about as far as I can get with Disney movies. But point being is that it sounds very whimsical on the chorus.
And, granted, like, the delivery is operatic, like, that is her delivery for the most part in here. It doesn't have, like an operatic sort of hook to it. It's more of, like, a kind of flat-out, like melodic death metal-ish chorus. Not something out of place on like maybe like a Within Temptation album or something like that. And that became like sort of a thing that I was like looking for. I was like, all right, is this going to be sort of the vibe on here where we get like more, big choruses like this? Because this band despite, having loads of symphonic elements, is generally very heavy. Kind of comparable to Septic Flesh, or maybe how Lorna Shore thinks they sound. But, they're known for just blast beats and just rapid fire machine gun riffing, and it's particularly brutal. Even their harsher vocals, their main songwriter, he's just got a vicious roar to him. And you do get to hear their more brutal side show up on songs like Pendulum, Blood Clock, and At War With My Soul, which is an awesome 3-track run on here that just packs a good balance of brutality and melody. You get that rich, dismal gothic atmosphere, but you also got these big, heavy, syncopated chugs and nasty grooves everywhere.
Yeah, in fact, the syncopated part in At War With My Soul reminded me a lot of Fear Factory. Not only do you get that heaviness, but you still get a little bit of flashy play even in the other instrumentation. There's a really cool fluttering keyboard solo that matches, or at least compare and contrast with the guitars in Pendulum, and that's pretty cool. And for the most part, in those 3 songs, it's really heavy, it's chuggy, it's syncopated.
Their keyboardist, Francesco, which is confusing me because their frontman is also named Francesco, just different last names.
Francesco squared.
Dual Francescos. But Francesco, the keyboardist, is actually the guy that does a lot of the orchestration too in terms of arranging it. And for the most part, I think he does a really solid job. Now that's also partial credit to Jacob Hansen, who mixed and mastered this, who we brought up and didn't know we were going to bring up for the Mushroom Head review. But his mix on here is pretty damn good, just in terms of allowing room for all this to breathe. I don't feel, at least in many parts, especially on the heavier, nastier songs, that the guitars get drowned out. A lot of the symphonic elements have a nice space that they occupy. The vocal layering doesn't overtake a lot of the guitars. The drums have a nice prominent sound to them. And for the most part, the symphonic sections pick their spots well. It isn't a constant din across the board. There are certain songs where they just let the riffs go and hey, we're just going to chug this up and make it as brutal as possible. And then when we get to a chorus hook or a more lavish bridge, we're going to kind of open up the symphonic elements. So I got to give them some credit for having a bit of restraint there, because with this style of death metal that this band does, restraint is seldom a thing used, because across the board, their entire discography you could describe as explosive, bombastic, epic, grandiose, other adjectives that imply big.
Huge.
That is this band's sound. This is the gear that they live in. And for the most part, they do it well. But I appreciate the fact that they didn't shoehorn all the symphonic elements in every single section, where it's just this nonstop din of look at all of the instruments that, I don't know if they're actually playing them all or that synthesize. Either way, look at all the instruments that we have on this one part. And generally they're pretty good about harmonizing stuff, harmonizing pianos with the guitar lines and vocal lines. But one of my main issues here, while it does retain some of the stuff that I initially really liked about this band, I feel like this is definitely a shift to writing somewhat more accessible music. The death metal aspects of this band's sound, I don't feel as though are in line with at least their older albums, where it was definitely more along the lines of Italian brutal death metal / death metal. That style is known for being insanely fast and insanely brutal, Vomit the Soul and stuff like that. This feels a little bit more along the lines of melodic death metal overall, and that really starts to surface when you get down to songs like Morphine Waltz, Matricide 821, and again, I Can Never Die. You just kind of notice that the song structure is more built around the hooks, and a lot more the clean refrains.
I've noticed throughout listening to this that a majority of the heavier parts, so to speak, were all found in the verses, and the choruses opened up to these big, lavish, hooky things. But you remember too, we spoke about bands such as Within Temptation or Nightwish that have just sort of a different vibe to them. Songs like Matricide 821, it starts off, again, like a big opera, and then it's got a nice build to it, and while it does kick into a briefly kind of heavier part of it, reminds me a lot of industrial metal, actually, to be honest.
Yeah, Theater of Tragedy, but more industrial. There's a segue, a pre-chorus, I guess you could say, where it kind of isolates everything down, and you get almost this sort of techno-ish pulse. There's sort of a pulsing keyboard effect going on in the background, and you get these isolated more operatic vocals, and it kind of segues into this giant gothic metal-ish chorus. And this song, I mean, for me, is kind of a big departure in terms of what I really liked about this band in terms of their earlier albums. Like, granted, you would get, like, big melodies, but generally there was, like, a sinister, foreboding feel. This feels a little bit more on the epic side. Dare I even say, like, almost kind of power metal-ish. I certainly got that vibe on I Can Never Die when it came down the chorus, just the way the chorus soars and ascends. And, you know, it's cool to introduce different dynamics to their music and all, but, I mean, I felt like that one was not a good pace setter, just in terms of, like, this band's more dark, foreboding sound.
And a lot of it was dark. It's fairly dark and gothic, but it also has a little bit more cheese to it, I would say. Like in the track Till Death Do Us Part, it's slower, it's got some neoclassical moments, and while they use the female vocalist more, they double track her vocals.
Yeah.
And if she would have kept it in a more mid-range or the lower range that she had, it would have made that song hit a lot harder as being, you know, dark and gothic and kind of sinister sounding. But they doubled it, and on top of the lower register, they put her in a higher register, and to me, it just made it sound kind of cheesy.
Yeah, my big issue there is it's a dirge. Like, it's Till Death Do Us Part. It sounds very funeral-esque. Like, not like Funeral Doom, but it has that sort of, like, woeful, somber vibe. And the fact that they kind of drop out everything, like, the music itself is very subdued, and her vocals carry over it. And I feel like if it was just, like, those isolated, like, lower to mid-range vocals she has there, it would feel more intimate. Like, this is a person reflecting on their life or mourning over someone. And, you know, I know that a lot of these songs, they definitely want to go for, like, a big, you know, emotional impact. I feel like they kind of deaden it there by, you know, layering the vocals, and it just feels, I don't know, like a little too bright, a little too poppy for what they're going for. Granted, like, the melodies on it I think are fine, but I think there's just too much, and look, this is a case where I think less is a little bit more, and it would convey the whole feeling possibly a little bit better.
And even though it's double-tracked, it's still a little dry, too. Like, if you would have put a little bit of reverb on it to kind of make it feel a little bit more cavernous in the sense of being, you know, you think of, like, when something's big and sad and you go to a funeral, like, I think of being in, like, a big Catholic church, and, like, you just want the tears to ring out a little bit more, and in this case it was really, really subdued and dry, and I was just kind of like, meh.
And that isn't really like a knock against the clean vocals. Like, I'm really hit or miss with them on here. Like, where I think they hit particularly well are At War With My Soul. She comes in with these big gothic, just operatic vocals, and it captures the mood in there, which is dark and foreboding, that double-time groove that carries it. It legit sounds like the kind of music that Satan would pimp strut his way into a room to, like, hello, bitches, I run this shit. The clean vocals on there complement all the dark atmosphere. It feels just gothic as hell. And I think that song is an absolute standout. And I would have loved to have heard more like that. But I think after that song, the album kind of goes off the rails. And, you know, I feel like it kind of tries to reach for, like, different kinds of melodies. Like, at certain points in here, I felt like it was, like, vaudeville metal.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of, play me off the stage, Sam. Like, don't get me wrong. Some of the interplay between, like, the pianos, the guitars, the vocals is kind of fun. But this album doesn't necessarily gel as well for me when it comes down to, like, I just want, like, more riffs and more, like, of that just brooding, dark, dare I even say brutal vibe that they put off in some of their earlier albums. So again, I think this is kind of a transitional album, and I feel like some sacrifices were made, like, in place of some of the, you know, more bombastic, kind of crazy tracks where they were, you know, kind of unpredictable in a way. I mean, granted, you could predict that they'd be faster than hell because this band blasts their ass off in terms of, like, their earlier stuff. But in terms of, like, where it would shift to and how they would incorporate all the symphonic elements, this feels like a little bit more safe overall. Granted, it's a big sounding album. It just feels, I don't know, kind of plain. I miss the chaos. I miss the brutality. And I kind of suppose, you know, it matters where you come into this band. Like, if you came in with some of their later albums and you got used to maybe a little bit more of the groovy, more melodic stuff, because it's been injected in their sound over a period of time. I feel like this album in particular is definitely a push more to the melodic side. I don't know, like this is missing a lot of the elements that I really like. I miss that unpredictable kind of wild, frantic side of this band, and I'm really not getting it here. Granted, there are some really solid songs that are very catchy, and when this band is at like peak evilness, it sounds like a death metal band scoring The Omen. But a good chunk of this just did not land for me. So overall, I'm going to give this 2.5 stars. I think it's okay, but I think they've definitely written better albums in the past. Labyrinth, King, the Mafia EP whoops ass too. This, I don't know, it's missing the brutal edge, and I think that was the thing that really made this band stand out, because they were insanely heavy, but yet they would find a way to incorporate all these symphonic elements, and they would do it really cleverly. This not only is missing that level of brutality, it's missing sort of that weird, clever nuance. Like, this feels like a band reaching for a little bit more accessibility. And I suppose there's nothing wrong with that as long as it's done well. I think this is done kind of well, where they blend it all together and kind of get, again, that heaviness and the melody going. I think it works well, but some of these songs just come across as just, I don't know, very lavish and kind of like all over the place. And I don't know, like, to me, not nearly as much fun. But I'm sure this album will find its fans. And if you're a big fan of bands like Septic Flesh, maybe Shadow of Intent, but definitely not as whimsical. Maybe Sigh in some ways. I don't know. Fleshgod Apocalypse is kind of their own thing, and my baseline comparison's always been Septic Flesh for these guys. But yeah, still check it out. Form your own opinions. Who knows? You might really dig this. For me, it was just okay.
For me, it was a 2.5 as well. When Fleshgod Apocalypse started, it was a heavy band that incorporated symphonic elements, and I really liked that. This record is more of a symphonic band that's incorporating heavy elements. If that makes any sense. Like, it's kind of like they stripped out a bunch of the awesome brutality and they filled it more with atmosphere and symphonics and singing and, whimsical times. And, like, that's cool and all, but you're missing that brutality that got me into you in the first place. And there's just not a lot of it on here. In fact, even in the 3-song run that was really good, it still wasn't, I don't think, up to par with what this band is capable of. I mean, while it was riffy and chuggy, it was a lot of like start-stop riffing too, and they left a big bunch of open spaces. It seems like it became more about the production or more about the theatrical aspects than it did about the actual music itself. And while I think these guys are all talented in what they do, like,
Very.
I can't sing like that. I can't do most of what this band does, so I'm not knocking them as talented musicians, but I think the overall presentation of this album wasn't so much a heavy hitter as it was, ooh, look at this, look at this. For me, it was just a bunch of symphonics and atmospheric moments coupled with an opera singer. And while that may be impressive to some, this avenue of Fleshgod Apocalypse is not my bag. Regardless, if you like this band, check them out. Like Nick said, they're kind of in their own bag. There are a few things or bands I guess I could compare them to. Probably Nightwish more at this point. I don't know. Check them out. Again, while it's not for us, it may be for you.
So, if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We are also on Patreon. If you'd like to help us out there, there's a link down below to thrallsmetal.com. Our Patreon link is there. It is also on our channel up in the banner in the bottom right-hand corner. But if you're looking for Thralls Metal stuff, you have to go to thrallsmetal.com. We have t-shirts, both old and new. The old ones are discounted, provided we have your size, and we even have hats. So if you're looking for any of that stuff, click the link down below.
Tons of stuff as always going on at Thralls of Metal. Album reviews, discography rankings, discussion panels, discussion topics, states of metal, is it not metal, bands that fucked up in the beginning of their career, bands that are doing great now, whatever. There's a bunch of stuff going on. We do it all for you guys. We appreciate you. Thank you for continuing to tune in and continuing to help this channel grow. It's been amazing to watch how much this channel has grown even in the last month or two. We couldn't do it without you guys. We appreciate you. Thank you.
Yeah, you guys absolutely roll. And after the voting is closed for Jammin John's picks for Melodic Death Metal, we will have the next batch up, so stay tuned for that. And of course, thank you guys once again for every bit of support you give us. That means a lot to us. So yeah, we will catch you later.